Assalamu alaikum, you're watching Views and News and I'm Faisal Rehman live from our Islamabad studios. Today we'll be talking about the economic crisis as far as Pakistan is concerned. We all know that certain bailout packages that we were expecting from the friendly countries, unfortunately they're not giving it. This is the latest news, and on top when we talk about the IMF, now Pakistan IMF talks are likely to be held on the 18th of this month, and then let's see how they proceed further. But obviously there would be a lot of attachments regarding what to do and what not to do. So most likely the petroleum product subsidy is going to be either reduced or fully taken off, and that is going to not only affect the inflation, but it is going to impact on so many sectors. Obviously transportation is the main area where I think the government really needs to concentrate. Secondly, as far as Saudi Arabia is concerned, yes, most likely they'll be keeping their $3 billion for another year or so. But again, the interest rate is much more higher than what we pay to IMF, and this interest rate is around 4%. Moving on, you talk about the balance of payments that is currently hovering around 40 billion US dollars. So you can well imagine the kind of pressure the government is in. Budget most likely will be presented in another 4 to 5 weeks. Normally the first week of June is the time when we in fact get to see that document. Again, perhaps most likely it is going to be a very tight. But when you look at the interest rate, which most likely is going to increase, it has to be either close to what the inflation is or perhaps slightly more. But the expected inflation is perhaps around 15% to 20% in the coming months. Currently 13.5 is the digit that what we got to know. Looking at the growth, obviously that is going to have a major impact. More interest rate, nobody's going to take the money in the private sector. Obviously another very important factor is about the government spending. Can they put that kind of a check on that? Well, we'll see. We have to wait and we have to see what exactly happens regarding that. The most important factor is about the reforms that we always talk about. But God knows what exactly is happening. We won't blame the previous government or this current government or the time period in which PMLN was in power from 2013 to 18. Normally what we hear is that whosoever comes in power blames the previous government. Now this has been a ritual for a very long time, but at the end of the day, people suffer. The purchasing power has gone down. The savings, if you look at the number issued by the State Bank of Pakistan, that's also very alarming. So practically most people who are currently in the middle class group, they are practically hand to mouth. Those who are from the salaried class, they pay the maximum tax, but yet there are so many other sectors, including your retail, that hardly pays 1%, or your agriculture for that matter. When we say our 22 to 23% of the economy is based on agriculture, why aren't they paying taxes? Because most of the transactions are done in cash. Another very important area. So there's a long story. How to increase our exports, how to search for new markets, how to reduce your imports. Multiple challenges again. But we'll be talking about that in detail. But before I introduce you to our panelists, our production team has prepared a report. Let's watch that.
The Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif-led government is consistently working to take Pakistan out of the current economic crisis as well as to provide relief to the citizens of Pakistan. These efforts are recently being acknowledged by the World Bank Regional Vice President for South Asia, Hartwig Scheffer, in a meeting with Deputy Chairman of Planning Commission, Dr. Mohammad Jahanzeb Khan, in Islamabad. In this meeting, both parties discussed the country's development priorities and World Bank's support to Pakistan's ambitious reform program on economic growth strategy. During the meeting, Hartwig Scheffer appreciated the steps taken by the Planning Commission in various sectors, especially in agriculture. Dr. Mohammad Jahanzeb urged the World Bank to continue to support the government of Pakistan in order to implement these projects. On the other hand, in order to provide relief to the common man, the Economic Coordination Committee has granted approval to revise the prices of atta and sugar from 950 750 per 20 kgs to 885 per kg to 70 respectively. Meanwhile, the economic difficulties of Pakistan were reflected in the Pakistan Stock Exchange decline by over 1,000 points on Monday as investors resumed the selling spree owing to economic uncertainty and political turmoil in the country. In order to create financial stability in Pakistan, the resumption of the IMF talks is mandatory. According to the media reports, the talks regarding Pakistan and International Monetary Fund may begin on May 18 in Doha. The media reports showed that these talks regarding policy-level discussions to revive the program and extending its tenure and size to $8 billion are very much dependent upon the start of withdrawing fuel subsidies by Pakistan government.
Now to talk about this, we have with us in our studio, on my right, is Sardar Yasir Khan Sahab, former President, Islamabad Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and a leading businessman. Thank you very much, Sardar Sahab, for your time. And we have with us Dr. Khaqan Najeeb, former advisor, Ministry of Finance, on Skype, and along with him, Dr. Salman Shah, former Finance Minister. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time for our program, sir. Now, let me put the first question to you, Sardar Sahab, and that is regarding the IMF. $8 billion, that's what we are looking at, perhaps more. But let's see, because this is hardly going to do some sort of a break even, but at least there has to be a certain amount in a bank. Unfortunately, the way the state bank reserves are depleting, I mean, that is very, very alarming. It is believed that hardly 2 months of reserves are there as far as the imports are concerned. So it should be minimum 6 months. But sir, A. Secondly, when you talk about that, two major issues would be there. One, most likely on the 15th of May, say another 5-6 days from now, the government is going to take away the subsidy and the fuel prices will go up. Second is about your tariff. Most likely couple of rupees per unit will be increased. This is what the demand of the IMF is. If the government does this, so the impact on an average man is going to be enormous. Inflation is going to hit the sky. Most likely transportation cost is going to go up and everything is going to get impacted, whether you talk about the food supply or otherwise. Let's start off from there, sir. If we get it and the government in fact removes the subsidy and increases the tariff and the price on fuel, what do you see ahead then?
What's unfortunate is we're not getting out of this circle. It's a vicious circle and we're going round and round. Every government comes and states the same thing, that we're trying to pay off the previous liabilities and we're trying to pay off the interest, which is why we're getting more loans. So we're not able to evolve as an economy, as a country. We're constantly doing exactly what the previous government did. What we've said time and time again is we need to find import substitutes and we need to diversify our exports. That's how we're going to grow, but that's just not happening. Still, we look at the collective export of Pakistan, it's about 25 billion. 6 billion is nothing as a program for IMF. Collective liabilities of Pakistan are well beyond that. And if we look at what we have to pay this year, 10 billion, and next year we're going on to well over 20 billion. How are we going to settle these liabilities? Are we going to keep begging for more money? And is that sustainable?
So this is what has been happening?
But this is not sustainable. This is a short-term approach, and again, we're going to have more and more money that's going to be paid, and we're going to pass the burden on to the average taxpayer or the average citizen of Pakistan. Exactly what we're talking about now. Inflation is going to go well over 15%, which is unrealistic, and it's unaffordable for the average citizen of Pakistan to be able to survive and sustain an average living. If you look at exactly what's happening in this financial year, you look at the first 10 months, our trade deficit has gone all the way up to about 39 billion. That's huge. Just April alone was about $3 billion. That's a lot of money. If you look at the imports, all of them have nearly doubled what we're exporting. So if you continue at the same pace, you're going to touch 50 billion by the end of this financial year. That's significant. Because of the economic uncertainty and the current political outlook, if you look at the stock exchange, exactly what you've seen, nearly 1,400 points have dropped. That's one of the highest drops in the last 4 years. So that means people have lost their confidence. With your biggest allies, China, UAE, and Saudi Arabia, they've turned around and said, you know what, hang on a second. We're not going to give you any more funds, simply because we don't feel, now it's a prerequisite, that we need to reinstate the IMF program. That shows that they've lost confidence in you. So what do you expect from anybody else? Where are the other investors going to come from? Your allies have backed out.
Absolutely.
That means they don't have faith and confidence in you.
No immediate bailout expectation from your...
That shows that they don't have confidence in the
countries.
government and they don't have confidence in the economy. We as a nation are not beggars. I've said this time and time again. We have the capacity to become lenders. We shouldn't be asking others for money, and it's just not changing. This government is doing exactly what the previous one did. The previous one did exactly what the one before that did. How are we going to move forward from this? If you look at you're talking about the fuel subsidy, that's 373 billion. That's a huge amount. So if you take that away from people, immediately it's going to be unbearable for people to afford that. Obviously, the commodity prices are going higher. They're not going any lower. So the cost is going to be passed on because, again, we're importing everything. If you look at the dollar, you're looking at about 188 is where we stand.
189 today.
So there you go. It's one of the highest we've ever been. So obviously, we're going sideways. We're not going forward. So my concern is that what the average person doesn't realize is what happened with Sri Lanka. That can easily happen in Pakistan. You're talking about 6 to 8 months. Currently, our reserves, our foreign exchange reserves, are about 10.5 billion from what's been stated. What if they're lower than that? If they deplete at the same pace, we've increased
and that money isn't ours either.
Obviously, it's all loans, right? So we've already increased our expenditures by increasing the minimum wage to 25,000 rupees. Do we have the money to pay that? So my concern is, what if it's not 6 to 8 months? What if we have 2 months of reserves left and the allies don't lend us more money, and IMF doesn't reinstate the financial program? What's going to happen? Can we afford not to pay our government employees, a state-owned enterprise that we keep talking about, restructuring? We haven't done that. So hundreds and thousands of employees that shouldn't be there in the first place, where are they going to be paid from? Your food shortage is going to happen. You're not going to be able to import. Your office, if you look at the wheat alone,
the circular debt.
Circular debt is huge. It's unbelievable. And you already have started load shedding. And you're going to pass that on. Again, the tariffs are going to go up, so your cost of production is going to increase. Your competitiveness for the industry is going to decline. How are you going to export? Which is what we've argued from day one, that we're not competitive in the world. And if you increase your tariffs, the cost is going to go up. We're not going to be competitive anymore, which is what we were. We had this positive outlook of perhaps 5% GDP growth. That's not going to happen at the moment.
And interestingly now, I was in fact watching a report on BBC, and they said that when it comes to Ukraine issue, obviously I heard today the Information Minister Mariam Aurangzeb was saying that the government has decided to purchase 3 million tons of wheat.
Yeah.
So Russia and Ukraine produce about 30% of the wheat. This time they could not even harvest in Ukraine.
Yes.
So, and a couple of other huge tankers, which they've got oil and other, they haven't reached there, and so many other huge ships containing the grain, they couldn't come out of the Black Sea because of the current war that is going on. That is going to impact the global economy.
We could have benefited from that. Azerbaijan approached us about 2 weeks ago and they said, we want to buy wheat from you. We had a shortfall. We expected and anticipated that we're going to have a production of about 28 million tons. In reality, it's about only 26 million. So we had a shortfall of about 2 million tons. And we are going to again end up importing rather than exporting. So we had an opportunity, a golden opportunity. If we had the amount of export available, if we had the amount of production available, we could have benefited from this. And we could have benefited, many other sectors. Agro alone, I've said this time and time again, we have the capacity to export $100 billion of agro products. This is a fine example that if Central Asia is reaching out to us, exactly what's happening in Ukraine. What about the others?
I mean, look at the fertilizer. 17% of the fertilizer is produced in Russia globally. Yes. So there's no fertilizer. You talk about edible oil that we
one of the best producers. One of the best producers. We have the capacity, but we
have the capacity, but I fail to understand why don't we have proper refineries for those? I mean, we always talk about $10 billion coming in from Saudi Arabia to install a refinery set up in Gwadar or in Balochistan. Nothing has happened so far. What I'm saying is that let's put a check on the imports and see that where we can actually reduce. Yes. But unfortunately, I think that is going to be a challenge and a half for the current government. Coming to you, Dr. Salman Shah Saab. Shah Saab, you've been in this field for such a long time. You've been the person who was taking decisions regarding that in the government also when Musharraf Saab was in power. I just want to know, sir, looking at the current figures and the facts which we have, sir, they are very alarming. Let's start off from there. Your take on this.
Well, I think the number one challenge right now is to avoid default on our external obligations and create an environment in which we can manage our repayments, particularly on the debt side. We have to refinance very large amounts of external debt, and we have also got to finance the current account deficit. So these two things are the number one priority which you want to ensure that over the coming months, both of these activities are properly done. Then having said that, the next step is we have to ensure that we don't, while we are combating inflation, we don't end up in stagflation, which means that we will have a worse situation if we get stagnation as well as inflation at the same time. And coming out of that is going to be even more difficult. Then the third item is that if we can get these two things right, then the third element is that we have to fix our energy sector. The energy sector is the bane of Pakistan's economic situation. So it has been very badly planned. The way we have invested in energy without really thinking about its viability and sustainability, we have converted the energy sector into almost an import sector. And we have based it on fossil fuels, coal, LNG, oil, and we have totally almost eliminated domestic sources of energy, which is now a very big problem for this economy. And unfortunately, the way we have financed this, it's everything is in dollars, and we consume it in rupees, and we don't generate any earnings, dollar earnings from this energy, because this energy is so expensive that without a very major subsidy to the export sector, they can't really depend on this energy. So that is the third big challenge which you have to face. And then, of course, the fourth challenge is how do you become more competitive and you raise your productivity, eliminate your inefficiencies, let the private sector lead the charge in the global markets, and we don't have that kind of productivity or competitiveness to get into the global market. So that is somewhat in a longer time frame. And fifthly, I think that the option you have right now, you are stuck in a situation where you have great power rivalry going on with the Ukraine war, having its impact on us, and our own CPEC having problems with the other powers who want to derail it, and that kind of uncertainty is definitely very detrimental to Pakistan. So I think the challenges are immense. The government, which is hardly 4 weeks old, I think they didn't have any estimation of what they were getting into. The timing for doing this no confidence move was totally wrong. And it has really ignited a downward spiral in the economy. And if you look at the international kind of news, ever since the no confidence move, our spreads have been increasing. Our access to international capital markets has dried up. It's going to be very, very difficult to refinance our debt. And the IMF is also kind of asking us to do things up front, to take the difficult decisions. There is no way that a political government can absorb all of that, but they have to. If they don't, then the economy will simply tank. And we'll have to push through the cost increases in petroleum prices, in power sector, the tariffs on electricity. We'll have to fix our fiscal deficits to the extent we can. The economy is going to really be a very, very tough challenge for the government. And they don't seem to have the game plan in place. I think the leadership in the different areas has not really thought about the problems. And right now it is a blame game going all around, whereas we have lost almost 4 or 5 weeks of very important time. So, Faisal, I think we are in for some rough time unless somebody bites the bullet and they take on the challenge and start implementing the difficult things. Our prices in petroleum prices and energy prices, they have to rise up to the level which we find in our neighboring countries. And I mean, there's no way we can subsidize these things. But politically, it's going to be a political suicide. So we are in a catch-22, and let's see what the future holds. I think there might be early elections in this whole thing, and that might solve some problems, particularly if if there is an interim government and which is empowered by all the political parties to negotiate with the IMF and do the difficult things, maybe we'll be able to do some of these things.
Well,
But
let's see,
right
because
now, uncertainty is at its peak, and there is no clear way forward.
perhaps that is exactly what most analysts have been saying recently, that the year 2022 is going to be the worst year as far as economy is concerned, because looking at the current happenings, I would say, things are not great. As you mentioned that, we need to increase our productivity. Dr. Saab, we can't increase that in a day or two. It would take time, perhaps a decade or something. You need to invest in the human resource and eventually expect them to be more productive, or efficiency for that matter needs to be improved as well. Unfortunately, that is another problem when you compare our labor with the labor of the neighboring countries. So there are a lot of ifs and buts there as well. Now coming to you, Dr. Khaqan Najeeb Saab, you've been a part of the IMF team that has been negotiating with the IMF. Actually, you were the person who was presenting Pakistan. What I want to know, sir, looking at the current situation and compare it with the kind of dealing you earlier had with the IMF, tell us how difficult this particular meeting would be that is most likely going to start on the 18th. This is going to go on for about a week or so. The team of IMF is going to be in Doha, where you'll be meeting them. But what I'm asking is, particularly, tell us that these two major issues, one is about the increase in the tariffs, and the second is about removal of so many subsidies. The third is again about the increase in the petroleum products, their prices. What is that supposed to mean? Because when you ask a normal person, sir, somebody was saying that petrol could actually go up to 225 rupees a litre. So that is something I'm not sure the country is going to digest well.
Bismillah Rahman Rahim. Faisal, thank you for having me. Whenever I come on your program or any other program, I always like to talk about the fundamentals of Pakistan economy. But, today where we stand, I think we need to talk about the very immediate challenges that the country has and try and forge a way forward on how to move on them. Yes, the local markets have reacted. The rupee deval, the Pakistan stock market, the T-bill rate going on to 15% for the government to borrow. The international Pak Euro bond is trading above 16%. The credit default swap of Pakistan is above 12%. So all in all, the market confidence is broken. The reason it's broken is, one, that the global growth is slowing. The global commodity prices are rising. That is having an effect globally, and especially on importing countries for their import needs. Our current account deficit is rising, and our fiscal is also rising because some of the subsidies that we've been giving that we could not afford. So that is the broad picture of where the country stands. But what is, of course, worrying, as the other participants have rightly said, we have $10.5 billion in the kitty as far as state bank reserves are concerned, which are obviously about a month and a half of our imports. That worries one. These are also the NIR, the net international reserves, which really matter and which the fund IMF actually takes into consideration, are quite negative without going into the number. So we have a net negative NIR when it comes to our reserves. So where from here? The first thing is that we must do our homework on a set of policies that we want to present to the IMF. Let me repeat that. We keep thinking that it is some IMF program which the fund comes and dictates to a country. I've run the only program Pakistan has ever completed. When we went to doing that program, we used to write the memorandum of economic and financial policies at the Q block. We used to sit with the privatization, with the energy team, with all other teams that mattered before we went to the fund in at that time in Dubai. We used to do our homework. So decide on the set of policies. Let's talk about petroleum policies, which is really bothering the nation. There is a 30 rupee difference on the MS petrol, which the cars and the motorbikes and the three wheelers use, and there is a 73 rupee difference on the price of the diesel. I think too much of a big deal has been made out of this. Make a policy. The easiest way to get out of this is if we do our homework, which we should have done in the past 4 weeks. There is a database of 33 million households that the country completed in October 2021. 33 million household means more than about 15 crore people. Triangulate that data with the excise and taxation data and give a subsidy to all the motorbike owners, all the three-wheeler owners. The fund would be happy with it. Whatever subsidy you want to give, a 10 rupee subsidy, 20 rupee subsidy, and take the other amount to full so that the subsidy general goes away. Do your homework before going to the fund. If you have done this homework and you've instituted that policy and then you go to the fund and tell them that this is what we have done, the fund would agree with you because you've targeted the vulnerable segments. That's what globally the world is doing. It is not true that targeted subsidy on fuels, electricity are not being given. They are being given in Europe as well. So this is the kind of work. Similarly, do the same things on all other fronts. If you want to complete the fund program, which you must complete because you are going to run out of dollars if you don't complete the 7th review, and now you should club it with the 8th review. Then have a set of policies that you can present for the budget. For example, the personal income tax. I keep saying that. 75 million is where you hit the highest personal income tax rate. Who earns 75 million in Pakistan? Bring that down to 35 million. Have a levy on the 900 billion profits that your stock exchange companies have earned. So, have some innovative policies.
These are very innovative, sir. I still remember when they introduced 0.1% value-added tax. And you know how much value-added taxes paid in Europe or in Western countries, or even in Far East for that matter. Sir, there was a lot of hue and cry. Nobody even accepted that. I'm just going to give you, a little detail on that. Some of the most, I would say, powerful movers and shakers in the stock market were against it. Shah Saab, if you remember, when Shaukat Aziz Saab was the finance minister and he took a couple of decisions, and the way those people reacted, I'm sure you know about that. Secondly, sir, whenever you talk about putting some sort of a tax in the agriculture sector, because it's an unpopular decision from the government which is not going to really benefit them politically. So nobody does that because most of these people who are elected from Punjab or Sindh or even so many other areas, these feudal lords would not like to pay. Then you talk about the increase in taxation. Hafiz Sheikh Saab has been in power in the PPP government as well as in the previous government also. But what I'm saying is that he always says, well, I've identified so many 100,000 people and they'll be in the tax net. They were never in the tax net. They are not in the tax net and they never will be in the tax net, sir. So, these unpopular decisions, especially let's talk about this current government, sir, why should they take? I mean, if the elections, let's suppose, are held after 6 months, 8 months, or whatever time period is given, they will not. So this particular budget is going to be a tough one because, you're stuck. If you take those decisions, you won't be able to win the election. If you don't, you won't be able to run the government. I mean, this seems to be the problem, sir.
So we are
Khaqan
between a rock and a hard place, right? But we cannot not take the decisions that are credible and that are not popular. The decisions, Pakistan is fighting a fight to survive on the external. We cannot not take these decisions. Besides that, if you take these decisions and you're able to do the fund with targeted subsidies and putting some burden on the wealthy people and on the people who have made good profits, forget the agriculture tax for now, forget the broadening. Right now, very targeted, very specific measures on these kind of people so that you can survive and get the fund going, so that you can get the Chinese rollover of $2.3 billion. You can have GHPL give you the money for Recordec of about $900 million. You can have UAE money, you can have KSA money. If you're unable to do this, you will have a survival fighting kind of a time in the coming months. You don't want to do that. On the other hand, you also need to put in some conservation measures. The reason you need to change prices that, Faisal, you will be surprised. The petroleum products use went up by 20% in April compared to last April because you are not getting your pricing right. Pricing is to control the demand that is rising because you're giving
pricing
fuel
is
at
the
a
most
price.
important component. Absolutely, you're totally right. But coming to you, Sardar Sahab, now, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has also advised his finance team. He says that when you deal with the IMF, make sure that they give some sort of relaxation. But according to the IMF, obviously, when you look at their terms and conditions, they are also right that, you know, if you need to do this, these reforms are a must. Situation isn't that great, as we all in fact agreed on one point that God knows where this ship is going now. But Sardar Sahab, being a businessman, I mean, and when you talk to the community, and especially to people like yourself, you've been the president of Islamabad Chamber of Commerce Industry, and you've always said that Pakistan has got a lot of money. I mean, you need to channelize that. That is the point. Because A, trust deficit. God knows, I've spoken to a lot of people and they had invested that money in Eurasian Pakistan and they were getting a handsome amount in the form of interest. I'm not sure about the future of that. A lot of people have withdrawn their money also. Secondly, sir, when you talk about the kind of visuals that we see on the television screens, that when Imran Khan Saab is addressing the non-resident Pakistanis or overseas Pakistanis, as we say, what if they don't send that kind of money back to Pakistan? I'm talking about the remittances, because we have recorded the highest number of remittances, and a lot of people said that, well, that was the trust in the previous government. But currently, sir, looking at the kind of reaction that we see, what if there is a check on the remittances also? Where will we go from there then?
This is a fear that one always has on both sides, people who are depositing the foreign remittances as well as the people who are paying taxes. Currently in Pakistan, you only have about 3% people who are paying tax, and that's simply because there's been a huge trust deficit, and we've not been able to convince the average taxpayer that, you know what, you're doing the right thing, we're spending your money appropriately, so I would be able to go convince others. I've said this time and time again that the government, FBR, or the government itself should issue platinum, gold, and silver cards to those that are taxpayers, so that when they go to the police department, when they go to the airport,
they should be treated as a VIP.
They should be.
This scheme was also, I remember, launched once. I'm not sure which government was it, but it was. And I remember Mancha Saab was very happy with it, that, you know, that maybe he was the highest taxpayer at that time.
That's the thing, it's encouraging, isn't it? And we've
is.
said this time and time again, but that's never happened. The other thing is, if you look at the current situation with Pakistan, the current account deficit is currently we're anticipating about 5% of the GDP. You're looking at about $18 billion. If you look at the budget deficit, it's about $3,100 billion. Now, the previous government in the mini budget said we're going to pass on some burden of IMF, which is what they stipulated. So it's about $300 billion as opposed to $700 billion, which is what was required. With the current government, if they're going to focus towards the national interest, not about self-projection, not about keeping every taxpayer happy, you need to make sure some drastic steps are taken for longevity. Look, I'll give you an example. Right now, with everything we're doing in Pakistan right now, we know we're bleeding. We've said this time and time again, if you don't restructure the state-owned enterprises, you're going to keep losing this money. So you're taking it from one hand in the IMF and you're throwing it down the drain because it's not required. If you don't restructure these, you need to increase the wages of those departments that are essential. For example, we're saying we need to mitigate or eliminate corruption. Increase the wages of the police force. Islamabad police force is paid less than the Lahore police force. There's a complete disparity. Rationalize that. Now, if you look at the average taxpayer, because it's my money, I'm paying well over 15%. we're saying income tax should be about 30%. But there's so many indirect taxes. We're looking at about 70 types of taxes. If we simplify the system, rationalize it, and convince those that are not paying, so broader tax net, enhance that tax net. So take the traders on board, take the businesses. There's plenty of businesses.
But what's the rocket science? Why aren't they doing it? Why any other government hasn't done it?
We have to take the majority of them on board. If you go to the business community, and I've said this to the previous government as well, develop a special economic cell, should comprise of people from Karachi, Lahore, Sialkot, Faisalabad, Islamabad, the main cities. Take 5 of them. They don't need portfolios. They don't need titles. It's just us working for our cities, and we can collectively build a forum where we can encourage others. We should have the authority to take this businessman directly to the chairman of FBR, or take the businessman directly to the prime minister, or directly to the finance minister if he needs that compulsion. All the Anjuman Tajiran, all these guys leading their associations, they need compulsion. We can give them that. They trust us. They don't trust the government. It doesn't matter what government we're talking about, because they know at the end of the day the money is not going to be rightly spent. Do we really need buses? Do we really need bridges when there's a hospital that's required? If the guy is dying in his bed, he doesn't need these things. So it's our priorities, what we're going to do. In Pakistan we have a saying, jo dikta wo bikta. That is a wrong approach. We need to focus on what's essential, what the necessities are. We need to focus on something. Look, when we're talking about our economy not being able to grow, it's contracting. There's a reason behind that. If you look at the current interest rate, 14%, what business, whether it's an industry or a real estate developer, what business will be able to get that lending and develop his project or put up new products?
In these given circumstances.
In this situation, right? I should be...
Even in an ideal situation, you can't do that.
So there's 2 things. One, you need to have special set of rules. So if I'm a developer, or if I'm working on industries, give me a special interest rate. Give me 3%, 4%. I'll say, you know what, this guy is doing a huge project which is going to create thousands of employment and is going to add to the economy. Give him a special interest rate. That'll incentivize major developers in the country to start doing hotels, start doing theme parks, start doing apartment buildings, whatever it is, maybe hospitals and schools. At the same time, let us go out there on behalf or with the Ministry of Commerce and encourage investors to
private sector's involvement.
Yes.
That's what
private sector never goes out. So if I as a government entity go out there and try to convince anybody, whether it's the Saudis, whether the Arabs, they'll be like, what stake do you have in the country? You're just a government salary paid individual. If I go out there like, so this is a tycoon who's talking to me, maybe he's at my wavelength, maybe this guy has a stake in this country, I can trust this guy. Because if my stake is in this country, that means he can trust me. He can be assured that for the next 20 years I'm not going anywhere. With the government, that uncertainty is always going to be there. Are you going to be here tomorrow? Tomorrow I'm going to be talking to some other minister. So they've never taken the business community on board. We've never gone for any road show. We need to get out there. We need to compel. I promise you, if someone like us or someone like from my business community...
I remember when Salman Shah was in power, he was the minister, so a lot of bonds were launched and they were oversubscribed, interestingly. So we all thought that, this is the time Pakistan has really, taken that huge leap. And I used to, in fact, I put this question to the Prime Minister, Shaukat, that we always hear that, we have taken off. So have we actually taken off? We said we have taken off and no more IMF. Because remember, in those days, they had in fact completed the overall, the deals and everything with the IMF, and we were very much away, and we all thought that, I still remember that word kashkol, we have thrown it away. But obviously IMF is a reality, 22nd program and now 23rd you're talking about. That's amazing to understand that private sector's role should be more, should be multiplied. There should be some sort of confidence given to them. But sir, unfortunately, if there is political uncertainty in any country, see what is happening in Sri Lanka for that matter. People do not have food. And what a beautiful country Sri Lanka is, with great, I would say, people, and they are so friendly, and they were based on tourism, and they were really flourishing. But suddenly within a span of 2 years, they are practically out on the roads and fighting, and even today 7 people got killed in Colombo only. So many cars and buses were torched. The PM house was attacked. Finally, the PM had to resign. But again, there are a lot of problems there as well.
Because of policy. Like if you look at Pakistan's scale, Bangladesh, right? Bangladesh is doing really well. 100,000 square kilometers. Pakistan is 880,000 square kilometers. Bangladesh exports about 40 billion. Where are we? So does our size correlate with our production? It does not. It's simply because of policy. We've never focused on...
Grameen Bank. There you go. Simple. I mean, I still remember the head of the Grameen Bank once was in Pakistan. I interviewed him also. And I mean, this man was so simple yet had brilliant plans. Now coming to you, Shah Saab, since we are not having much time left actually, but sir, let's talk about these suggestions. If you have to give some sort of an advice to the current government and the finance department, I mean, there are crises, there are issues, there are problems, but still we have to get out of it, sir, sooner or later. What would you advise?
Look, I think we have to really look at the role of government in our development. And immediately, I think we should get the government out of development and give it to the private sector. Public-private partnerships and even infrastructure finance can be done by the private sector. It has to be done on an economic basis. There is nothing free in this country because we have turned up public sector development program into a poke barrel type of investments which are not contributing to the development and economic growth of the country. So if you look at the rate of return on our public sector development programs, it's probably in the negative. It was good when we were making the dams and the economy really benefited, but now I think almost ₹1 trillion every year is spent on poke barrel politics, and that is the first place which you'll see disappear because the government can't increase its revenues overnight, but it can certainly cut down on the development program and open up the way for the private sector. So that would be one thing. The second thing which I think they should do very, very quickly, if they have the time, is to put everything on the privatization block. Let's get rid of these white elephants once and for all, and
But
let's
again,
really
a very
create
non-political
market
decision,
economy.
sir.
We have to ensure that the market is efficient, there is competition, strengthen the Competition Commission of Pakistan, and let the private sector then take up the challenges of not only participating in this economy but also in the global economy. And also, I think now that we have CPEC, we must make sure that we get into the Chinese market. The exports which are possible into the Chinese market, Vietnam is doing it, Thailand is doing it, Malaysia, all the ASEAN countries, they are very
Sir, they
big
are far
trading
ahead in
partners of China.
value addition.
And
I still remember when we were supposed to be the Asian Tigers, we actually were close to that. Pakistan was far ahead of Vietnam, but now see where Vietnam is.
The bureaucracy, the no objection NOC culture is still very prevalent. I mean, getting electricity is a big problem. I mean, everything is a problem in this country as far as investment is concerned, and the way out of this mess is investment, and it is private investment and particularly investment by the overseas Pakistanis and foreign investment. Because
Absolutely.
locally we are unable to earn the dollars, and locally I think our capacity is limited. So overseas Pakistanis, foreign investment, we really need an investment surge to get us out of this hole which we have dug
All
for
right, sir.
ourselves.
All right.
And this
Now,
is, this is
coming
something
to
which
you,
we have to
Khaqan Saab, quick comment. I still remember when Mia Saab was in power, he was the Prime Minister, if I'm not wrong, that was his tenure of 93 onwards, right? What happened was that the dollar accounts were frozen, and I still remember 47 or 46 rupees were paid against a dollar, whereas the actual price was much more. What I'm saying is, or rather I'm asking is that, can we see some worst case scenario? Is that possible? A, answer me for that, and then also your recommendation, what needs to be done.
Faisal, I think there is a better answer to that, and that is that the FE25, $6.5 billion that we hold, we should allow that to be converted to the state bank reserves at the same kind of rate that we are offering to the non-resident Pakistanis of about 5 to 7%. So there will never be a need. So if I'm holding a foreign exchange account in Pakistan, I am allowed to deposit the same money with the State Bank of Pakistan and earn in the certificate, so you will never have that fear. So hopefully not. That we will not move into freezing once we get the fund, once we get the Chinese money, once we have the oil line. So that's, I think, where the first order of business is. The second order of business should be that we should have a budget which focuses on expenditure reforms. And the reason I say that is because our expenditures of 7.5 to 8 trillion are fueling inflation in the country. So you need to get your pensions right. You need to make sure that you have some kind of debt work done so that your 3.2 trillion of markup that is going is at least it doesn't rise any further, and other PSDP reforms so that you start focusing on the software. So whereas we focus mainly on the revenue side, this budget should show us an expenditure reform side on the grants, on the subsidies, on the targeting of subsidies. Just one last comment. I think because we've talked about election, this time, if you really, all the parties should start thinking what the growth model is. I'm not going to talk about what it should be, but the current growth model has been cheap financing, rents to the rich, cheap money to them, subsidies to our exporters, amnesties, and investment in the real estate. This is not a survivable growth model.
But unfortunately, that is what is happening. But anyway, thank you very much, Shah Saab. It was a pleasure having you. Dr. Khaqan Najeeb, Sardar Saab, always good to have you on the show, sir. Thank you very much for your time as well. And that's all we have for this. I'll see you tomorrow at 8:05 p.m. Till then, you take good care. Allah Hafiz.